I'm going to talk about what I'm paying attention to, and we'll see. Actually, I'll wait a minute. 'Cause I know people will see, they'll get their notifications. So if I'm running in here, we're going to go ahead. Unable to upload thumbnail. Yeah, who knows? They have all sorts of problems trying to broadcast anywhere. Isn't that the way it is these days? Did you all see the people over, Dorsey and Zuckerberg before Congress saying, "Oh yeah, we shouldn't have censored stories"? Of course you don't. You don't ever take accountability for things until after they happen. But that's what really I want to tell you is a story of censorship today. And people always ask me, well, where's the proof of election fraud? And the thing is, you don't need proof if you intimidate all your witnesses. So here's what last night or yesterday, some of you will be following in the state of Michigan, in Wayne County, there was a refusal from the people in Wayne County to certify the election. Okay. And what does that mean? What it means is if the people who are the board of, the board of elections, whatever they call it there, look at an election and decide, wait a second, there's just things that don't fit the state law or that were not done correctly, they can say there's too many irregularities and report to the state legislature in Michigan that they do not have to, or they do not have confidence that the election results recorded were accurate. And as it came out in Wayne County, they have a board of 4 people, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And what happened was that the 2 Republicans refused to sign off on the election. All right, so this was like big news all around the internet yesterday, right? And they were going nuts on Twitter about this because it would have allowed the state legislature to make the decision. Good morning, Gandalf. Good morning, Timmy, and good morning to everyone here throughout the northeastern nation. Good to see all you guys. Even though I know we got some Midwesters in here, but this actually involves you guys, so this is actually appropriate. Salt, good to see you this morning, and good morning to everyone. So what ended up happening was that over the course of the evening, that these people, one of the members of the board of elections, whose name is Abraham Ayash, and you can go find all this on Twitter. I think it's AIYASH. I don't know his origin. He looked like he's from the Middle East somewhere, but I don't know. Ended up doxing a fellow member. He goes on social media and he talks about his fellow member Monica Palmer, and he tells the names of her kids and the places you can find her and all these things. And what happens is basically a hate brigade settles on her to dox her as one of the Republicans on the committee into basically blackmail and cajoling, forcing her to change her vote. And it worked, by the way. All of a sudden, several hours later, a vague, amorphous promise to have an audit, which was said, oh, yeah, we'll do that, was added. And then the election was certified. And you saw elements of Twitter, amongst other places, celebrating that basically people were intimidated into ignoring the law in favor of putting forward a sham election. And whether you think whether you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever you are, if you're going to have a process of an election, and if you're going to pretend this farce of a system has any validity, you ought to at least desire that the people who observe it are allowed to do their job and to say that, yes, this was a legitimate election, or no, it wasn't a legitimate election. And I understand why they said it wasn't a legitimate election. Jennifer Zhang, who does work for NTD News, has a 21-minute video talking about some of this, where they have 2 observers from different Detroit precincts, and then they tell a story that goes something like this: that they were there and they received about 7,000 votes during the time of the actual election, up until about 8 or 9 p.m. Then they shut this down, they count the votes, but they don't certify them, and they're stuck there till 4 in the morning, right? But around 3 in the morning, they see vans come with truckloads and boxes of ballots, although they don't count many of them. They count maybe 7,000, 8,000 more, and then everyone's told to go home at 4 p.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning. And this would be November 4th, the day after Election Day. And she has 2 different stories from 2 different precincts that work this way. And then you can check it out, by the way. And what happens is, all of a sudden, between 4 and 5 a.m., after everyone left, 100,000 votes start popping up between all these various places. Or maybe it was just one place. It wasn't clear to me what she was saying with that. But what happened is that votes were manufactured. And it seems like there was a multi-tiered fraud scheme. There were, of course, fake mail-in ballots that were done. There were people who were multi-scanning things. But there was also that alone wasn't enough, which probably suggests that some of those videos floating out there about how big Trump won is actually probably accurate. Not because people love Trump, by the way, but Biden was a non-entity. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about the Dominion scandal, for people who want to look at this in an ideological perspective, is the Democratic Party has long used this in their systems. And so it's probably true, as Sidney Powell herself, I think, suggested in one interview, if I remember right, although I'm not 100% sure on that that in fact Bernie Sanders probably defeated both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and that this election system played a role in that choice never being allowed to come to fruition, because of the fact of how heavily gamed it was. We didn't have an election; we had a pageant where the selection was already in. I mean, this is as fixed as Olympic figure skating, right? And this is what we've seen. But in any case, in Detroit, in Wayne County, now what happened was that these election results have been certified. Someone's life has been threatened. And we saw this. We saw this happen in the state of Pennsylvania, where law firms were basically withdrawing left and right from cases where you can't even try the law now. You can't hire representation or cancel culture goes after you. And for those who don't understand what this is textbook Maoism. Mao believed that you have the right, in support of, quote, justice, what they would call it, or communism as it really was, to go ahead and intimidate, attack, and control by any means possible. And there's no pushback. Where is the FBI on this? Nowhere. Nowhere to be found. It's absolutely crazy. They're busy going around complaining, well, white supremacy is the big threat. And this is what you're dealing with. You are dealing with a state that is out of control, that is trying to take absolute power for itself. And this is why we're going to have to think a lot differently very quickly, because this is not about Donald Trump. I told you, everybody, I did not vote for Donald Trump. I was not happy with Donald Trump. I do not trust Operation Warp Speed. And there's something in my gut that tells me there's another card to be played where he's going to come out smelling like roses, and then we're going to step in it. And I'll be very clear of that. Nonetheless, sometimes you have to fight the battle in front of you before you can fight the ones after that. And the battle in front of us is about whether or not we will simply allow to have a solution that was dishonestly taken to be dictated. Yes, I am a monarchist. You all know that. But I'm very upfront about it, clear about it. I say why I support that, how I would support it. And this sort of underhanded means of pretending I have this huge mandate, that is terrible. And that's what the Biden campaign has enabled. And we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with this. Because I will tell you one thing. I don't know what the Supreme Court will do with this. I know it's going to eventually end up there. You would think, because in fact, these sort of arguments were used in the Bush v. Gore case, in which Kavanaugh, who else was in it? Gorsuch and Barrett were actually involved as attorneys. Alito had the state of Pennsylvania ignore his order put forward. Clarence Thomas is not a Joe Biden fan. Go look at what happened back in the day if you don't understand that. But even that's terrible, that we're counting on the political partisan leanings of the Supreme Court to lead to actual justice, because we have a legal system that won't do it. We have a law enforcement mechanism that's just basically used to punish people like a secret police. And people don't realize how close we are to living in a true police state. The truth is, we're about 60 days out from it, whatever it is, to the inauguration, if Joe Biden gets in there. And at that point, whatever you think, we are now living under a proxy state. And we have to be ready for that. And we have to go ahead and begin our withdrawal. And if you fight that, I mean, maybe at this point, something can happen to change things. And that's something people are going to have to think about as all the lockdowns happen and all these sort of terrible things go forward. Because we know if they're willing to go this far, how much further will they go? And look, it's like a shark that gets a taste of blood, okay? That's what's happening out here. The way we are seeing this conducted, it's ugly, it's vile, it's visceral, and it's one-sided, by the way. If imagine for a second, just imagine for a second that 4chan went out there, okay? So as he's saying this on the left, and you had militias show up at those members, you would have a national firestorm, you'd have the media coming down there, you'd have the FBI arresting half the damn state. But we've seen in real time as a public thing, and this was saying, oh, well, they're evil fascists, so you can do this to them. And this is just this is a Detroit Republican. How fascist can you be? It's a woman with 3 kids. I mean, let's be realistic again. This isn't Leni Riefenstahl we're talking about. This is something that's a lot less than that, and yet we are permitting this because social media allows this. This is what woke capitalism's all about, and this is what's been going forward. This is really difficult. Let's see what Timmy wrote. Plans if you're in the UK like you're different to the US, you have more space to keep apart. Yeah, we do have more space to keep apart. That's true. You don't have to be around people who hate you, but the people who hate you can steal your government. I mean, I've seen the supposed results of what was taken on those German servers, right? And I will tell you this, that one of the problems is that a lot of states like Virginia, Maine, New Hampshire, these were supposedly right-leaning states where we would have had a very different government and we could have done things differently. Or even if you believe the map I've seen out there floating around, California California, which sounds sort of crazy, but why not? All the leftists left. They all went to Idaho. Just give some love to my friends up there. But it really is true out there. There's been a huge migration. But yeah, you're right. We do need a spiritual connection. I agree with that. And that's why, I mean, really, I was talking about this in my last show, and I've almost thought I might write a book on it. We'll see. I'm not sure I will because I'm not sure people would listen. But I was talking about this idea of fifth generation warfare as a spiritual awareness. It's really the rebirth of the Crusades, and that's what it will have to be. And people will have their different opinions of it, but realistically, it's a authentic connection to God that helps lead you against a system where technology is used as the means of your oppression, and that is what will be necessary. And I will be arguing to the day I die. Taylor's Volt. That's exactly right, for my Christian brothers and sisters out there, that we need to go ahead and reclaim this, because the problem is, and this is the problem with politics and technology for that matter. It's the same problem. The ends always justify the means, and if you come from a spiritual mindset, you understand the means are what lead to the ends. How you do things matter immensely, and how you do things is the fabric of society. Yeah, you could say that someone has $1,000 and you just steal 500 and they're gonna take 500, but you can't thread things together, and that's what you have to do to build culture, to build society, to build civilization, confidence. A human being, for instance, if you just punish a child all the time and you never teach them anything, what will you end up with? A scared and frightened animal. Whereas you have to take time and invest into it. And the rules that apply for raising children, I think, fit just as well for what you do in the larger society. But what I'm saying is we don't see that. And there's the microcosm of this where you're seeing an election stolen. One second. My apologies for that. Mornings are tough for me sometimes. But there's the macrocosm of it, which is the whole levels of division between us, and that we're going to need an organic society in the future where people all fit in, and we're going to need new identities. So, if you're in the UK, just use an example, since Timmy's here, is that mean, embracing of, English identity versus Scottish, I should say, Welsh, Irish, whatever, Northern Ireland, although I think Ireland might end up coming back together at some point. But it's kind of a shame. I don't want to get into the domestics of British politics because, frankly, I'm just not that good at it at this point. Although I will say it's interesting that Bojo over there is basically locking everything down to oblivion, and I don't really know what exactly is happening and how much pushback we see from the British. I know I've seen a lot on the continent. Maybe I need to do some more research on that, but it's been hard, and frankly, I'm going to be busier this weekend than I thought. So having a chance to do all the research I want to do on Canada and other things is probably going to end up having to wait a little bit, because now's the time to take care of problems, whatever they may be for you and yours, before you go forward, since we don't really know what's going to be happening. So this is one of those things. I get this stupid notifications. I get like a notification saying, "Do you want to follow the Louisville Cardinals on Twitter?" I don't give a damn about Louisville. I mean, it's fine. I don't have a problem with Louisville. I just don't have any connection to it. Other than I've been there twice, I think, on orders I had to do for deliveries like 5 years ago, but many years ago, more than 5 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I would have been when I'm still in Pittsburgh. Anyway, so that is something I'm watching very closely. And, you hear Sidney Powell going out there. You see, what's his name, Lynn Wood going out there, these attorneys, as the sort of frontmen for the saying they have evidence to prove these systems are terrible. And so a lot of information is coming out about Dominion. And apparently Dominion runs a system that is based upon Smartmatic's voting system, which was created by Hugo Chavez as a means to fix elections. And you can actually look in some of the documentations floating around out there, and how these systems operate, that one of the things they can do is they can move votes around. So it's a perfect strongman tool, and yet we have it here in the United States. That's why the state of Texas, to their credit, refused to certify it. That's why a lot of tin pot dictatorships love to use it, so they can appear to be democratic. And what's going to happen is, as the evidence comes out on this, I think we're going to see people worldwide question the legitimacy of their democratic governance. And you would ask, well, why is the system going down this pathway? And let me put the next level of tinfoil hattery on this for you. Because if you're trying to create a great reset, if you want a new global world order, you have to destroy the existing order. So we're not only destabilizing the United States, what we're doing is we're basically calling into question the validity of every election that has happened that uses this system, which many, many countries do in many years. I've heard suggestions, for instance, that they were involved in the Brexit vote. And in fact, the reason why it was as close to on Remain's side is because they pre-gamed the election expecting certain outcomes. And their polling was so far off that they went beyond the margin, and that's why they ended up being surprised, or in fact it was the massive turnout of the British people for Brexit, or for the Americans, for Trump, that they got it wrong in 2016. But in 2020, they weren't going to take that chance with the American election. They had multiple levels of failsafe. And so when you saw all those votes shut down, the vote counting mechanisms that happened as we went into the later hours of the night, where they started popping up at 4 a.m., it's like you can read this story. It was in, what's it called? The Buffalo Connection or something, where they were talking about these mob guys in Philly were being paid by the ballot to bring in, thousands of votes and just drop them off. Like, will you vote for who we say you vote? And having spent time in Philadelphia, I went to college at Swarthmore, some of you will remember, totally believe it. But that's what you want to do, because you want to have an evidence trail, and even if it's a bad evidence trail, at least that's somewhat defensible, as opposed to what people saw, and people who have more time and willingness to do the research on it than I did showed, like, you would see in real time. People have watched the CNN feed. You'd see 137,000 votes go away from Trump and go over to Biden. So they were playing pick and choose. So the election, the point of it is, no one's going to believe in the election, and that's going to lead to a breakdown. And that's kind of the story, because either way they win. And this is the problem with fighting the New World Order. That ultimately, on the one hand, if you allow them to take the election, you allow them to seize the country without any problem, and then they've won, and then they begin persecuting who they want selectively. Alternatively, you go ahead and fight and resist them, and then you end up leading, or if Trump gets back in there, you end up in a civil war where the thing gets taken down, and it's a more thorough breakdown, and then that's the excuse to bring in external forces, or to go ahead and destabilize the whole system so they can say, don't be like America. And so we are stuck in a trap, and I'm not surprised we're in this trap. We've been in it for a while, and it happened where we have ideology over identity. And that's one of the reasons why here on Free Atlantic Radio, what I say to my friends in the Northeast, whether they be left wing or right wing, look, you can be a Bernie bro, or you could be on a Trump train. It doesn't really matter. What I'm telling you is, you could be better than either, and we could sit down. And let me put out a reasonable supposition, a very reasonable proposal you won't get from anyone else. We should sit down, honestly, and we should have the three most important issues to the right and say, let's put them in. And the three most important issues to the left, let's put them in. And three just really smart issues for everybody. It might look like, if you were the right, you might say, hey, we're going to go ahead, we're going to get rid of abortion, we're not going to get into stupid wars anymore, and you're going to own your land in perpetuity, right? That would be pretty good. That would make people on the right. And the people on the left could say, hey, we want to make sure that, no one is homeless. We want to make sure that we protect the environment for the future, and that people aren't buried under insane debt. And we could say, okay. And then we'd say, all right, we're not going to have a central bank. We're going to have good public infrastructure, and we're going to invest in healthcare so that our people can be healthy. And then you could have a new center form where you get rid of the radical fringes of it. You get away from the insane idea of reckless, predatory capitalism on the right, where you have the idea that you have multi-trillionaires of the future, your Jeff Bezos, who can run everything. And you get away from this idea on the left that you're going to go ahead and, force people to go ahead and say, I am a bad person because of what I was born and all that. And you get to idea of a cultural normalcy that's there. And we could do it much like Timmy says. And even if we do it, I will tell you something, even if we separate, there will still need to be compromise. And for this reason, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, I live only around people who think like I do. This isn't like the first Civil War in the United States, or if like you had England versus Scotland, or, Quebec even against the rest of Canada. You now have people who are integrated. And so what I present for my friends in the Atlantic as a model that works in other places, hopefully it could work in the West and the South and other places, other countries even, is that is the means to do it. And what we need to do is begin building an alternate scaffolding where we take away legitimacy. And I'm not looking to fight, because the truth is, we should have legal enforcers who are thugs. And at some point, if enough people are mad enough, those things will work on their own. You will see citizens' posses. The sheriff will probably be the intermediate problem, where we see the movement from federal law enforcement and corrupt state police to a different system where you're going to see sheriffs and posses, and you might see eventually, I don't want to say vigilantes, but where you'll see protection squads formed in areas against unlawful acts. You have to forgive me. I'm just a little congested this morning. But I think that's where we're going to go. But what we don't have is an identity we can stand behind. We don't have legitimacy of purpose, and we don't have a well-structured plan for that. And that's what I'm working on for here. I don't pretend that people in the big cities are going to listen, but I'm actually guardedly optimistic that we're going to have people in New Hampshire and Vermont listen. I know we got a lot of fans in upstate New York. We have fans in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and in as much as the language barrier allows in Quebec. heck. And if it just ends up being us in the far Northeast who say the hell with you all, then so be it. Not because I have any lack of love for the people in lower New England or the Mid Atlantic, but because they're fighting over all these sorts of problems. And like Timmy says, giving all the power and state safety to the state is never a good thing. This is going to organically develop where towns, communities, families, neighborhoods are going to separate away from this and say, we're not going to be a part of it. And if it ends up being conflict, it will happen quickly. If it doesn't, it will end up being non-enforcement, much like you see with the Swedelanders down in South Africa. But ultimately, we end up in the same place where we will have levels of government in local areas designed and weaponized against the intrusion of external forces from the city and the state and the sort of massive humanity that's being guided by the propaganda system. And the propaganda system is so bad. I mean, it's really, if I was able to do it, what someone needs to do is take like a neo-Jungian look at this and figure out how it is we are so susceptible to propaganda. There was a great thread on Poll the other day where it was talking about how our mixed genetics have led us to be have different manifestations of personality, a little bit of miniaturized schizophrenia, right? But then what it does is it makes us unable to have a coherent response against propaganda, and that people are more easily propagandized now than at any point in history because we're more capable of seeing different perceptions out of it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But the problem is now we get attacked by imagery and we just get assaulted by it. And I will say, thinking involves reading, involves complex abstract thought and the time to process it. Whereas we are in a reactive mindset because we're being constantly bombarded with images and headlines. And it's a form of psychological torture if you understand it right. I mean, you could actually make an argument, and I think it would be psychologically sound, that if you force people to be off media for a month, like if you literally just shut off the screens for a month, I think you'd have people come out a lot more sane on the other side and be like, okay, this is what's true, this is what isn't. But we are caught up in our own little fictions, and I'm playing into it a little bit too, right? Because I'm doing this video. But the thing about it is, I don't put a lot of special effects in my videos, Every now and then I'll put a wig on. I mean, I reached the level of Monty Python, maybe, or even worse than that, maybe Monty Hall. Let's make a deal, right? So that's about all I do. But I just come on here and I talk to you, and I don't give you a lot of distractions. I give you some stream of consciousness, interactions when you ask questions in little bits and pieces I think would be useful to you on any given day. And I will say, just a quick programming note, you probably won't get a regular show from me on Friday. If things work out the way I think they're going to work out, you might get a show from me if I can keep the coverage well enough from the road during the day. But I'm going to have to do some travel, which I did not expect. But that's a long story that involves snakes, my wonderful wife, and different problems. And I really don't want to be doing what I'm doing. But Lord knows we help people, and I'll have faith the Lord will look out for me and for her for a day or two. So that's okay, because we love to protect animals, and we love to protect people. We love to help people, and we've been trying to do it. And hopefully we're making a difference. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been shut down yet, so that's good. Even though I haven't lied yet. I mean, I don't drop every bomb I could, but I do what I can, And thank you for that kind prayer, Timmy. I appreciate it. Yeah, my wife, she's had a rough go lately, but she will recover. She's a fighter. And now winter coming, it's a season for rest, and we'll see what happens, and hopefully something good will come of it. But so what am I watching for the rest of this week? So let's go there for a minute. I'm wondering if all the bluster is going to lead to something in terms of what we are seeing with, like I said, keeping an eye on Sidney Powell, on Lynn Wood, some of these other people. And, the drip, drip, drip of evidence of everything going crazy out there is just something people won't accept. And I think, people want to get through Thanksgiving maybe, but we might see something funny happen there. And I think in December, when decisions about the election ultimately have to start happening, the question is what people will tolerate, and you see the anger rising on the right. I watched some of that MAGA march and just in review, and they were yelling at the cops to take a side, because you keep seeing the cops take the side of the people who are basically destroying the system. And the thing is, you either have to defend the people or you have to defend the system. You really don't have a choice. Free Atlantic Radio is all about defending the people. I'm a nationalist. I'm not a statist. I believe in identity. I don't believe in ideology. I believe in culture. I don't believe in corruption. And those are the decisions you have to make. And for the people who are out there who serve nobly and ably, look at how they treated you in Minneapolis. Look how they treated you in Seattle and Portland. And remember, there's not a lack of need for people who can keep the peace, but keeping the peace on what terms? You made, Most of them have made vows to the Constitution and to the various ideas of protecting the liberties, freedom of thought, freedom of action, the fact elections have meaning, and you must protect those. You're going to need them to step up. And that's what happens. When the Soviet Union fell, what happened was, and some of you might remember, they have their own version of the White House. It looked like a ridiculous, like dingy Hilton, but they came down there and and some of the hardliners wanted to back Gorbachev went missing, and the question was, would they shoot on the people? In China, they did. In Russia, they did not, and that's why Russia ended up being a different country, and the Soviet Union fell. And whether you think that's good or bad, that's what ended up happening, because ultimately it comes down to that, and we got to know where our people are going to stand. So from everyone throughout the Northeast, the mountain divisions of the National Guard, and of course our beloved friends in the 10th Mountain Division over there at Fort Drum, all of these people are going to have big decisions to make if things get funny. And here in the Northeast, we are not a particularly angry region at this point. We haven't suffered the consequences of some of America's bad decisions. We have wealth, and we generally get along okay, minus college towns where people have been indoctrinated to stupidity, and where we've had people imported where they shouldn't have been brought, like Lewiston. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't understand by what logic it makes any sense to drop Somalians. If you were going to bring them anywhere, you should have dropped them like in Louisiana or something, somewhere they'd want to be. But I know why they did it, because it's an effort at destabilization, because if you're fighting over that, and there are victims in it too, believe it or not. You don't have to like them to recognize that they're pawns in a game beyond their control. They didn't choose to be brought here. They may have volunteered for the offer, but someone was doing that. And so when you begin to see these deeper games at play, you begin to understand that those are one of the problems that we're going to see become more and more pronounced, and these divisions are going to increase. And so the way out of that is a minus. You have to have a head for Christ. I mean, if you haven't read the gospel lately, you should at least have the four gospels, have a pretty good sense of them. And given that it might be topically relevant, reading the book of Revelation is not a bad idea for people. I highly recommend that. But we can either continue finding fights with one another, or we could find means to separation for cooperation, collaboration. And good to see you, Matt, by the way. Glad you're here this morning as we go through just a couple thoughts in my mind. And I hope you all are having a very good morning here as we go through the Atlantic. Usually I do my reading in the morning, but I just don't know what I want to read, and I felt unsettled. So I'm not ready to read today. I'm probably going to end up watching movies and being largely useless, which I really don't like for a day. But honestly, it's either that or go organize a bunch of people. And I'm really hoping that this system can somehow resolve itself peacefully. Not because I think America's good, and not because I think the outcome of that's necessarily ideal. I'm going to be on here. And if this all works out like I hope, and we see the election overturned and a lot of corruption put forward, we're still going to be dealing with the fact that Trump will be even more empowered, and Operation Warp Speed is going to come around saying, now that we've fixed this, we're all going to give you free money. It's great. It's Trump bucks. Take your shot. And that's unfortunately where we're going to go, because people who look like they're our friends or not, I don't think that there are good guys in Washington. I'm sorry. People tell me there are. Every good person I met runs from Washington screaming. How many times can you drink from a sewer before you end up, if you're drinking from a poisoned well, that it doesn't end up going forward for you? And I know there are idealists who went down there with good intentions, but as the old saw goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And from my point of view, the road to hell is 95 south heading towards D.C. You know what I'm saying? So that's something to think about in the Atlantic. It's actually why when I drew the last lines of what we were doing, I didn't try to include Maryland and Delaware, because they're too close to DC. They can't help it. And it's not bad. I mean, I like people who live on the Eastern Shore and on the Delmarva Peninsula, and not like we wouldn't eventually do something. But unfortunately, when that gaping yaw comes forward, it's going to be a problem. But I do have some fun stuff. Just a quick reminder, get me your postcards, get me your license plates. Don't have to be yours, but license plates from in region. It's going to be an awesome collage it'll make for the show. We got some new ones in. I want to thank people who sent them, and some new little props. I'm putting together a little studio. P.O. Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine, 04442. And I will get those, and I will definitely include them, as well as your letters if you have things you want to read. If you send me letters, and I will read them on air. We'll add that as a feature, and maybe if there's enough of them, I'll add another show. But I like letters. Theoretically, you could send me emails, but letters are more fun, so send me letters, because I like that. It means you took the time, even if you print it out. And it means you'll probably have to be more organized in your thoughts, too, so that's okay. Plus, it's a good idea for us to start getting in the habit of using mail and using other things. The electronic world could be taken from you very quickly. The way you beat high tech is with low tech, and the way you avoid surveillance is you go ahead and interact with people directly, and you need to start thinking of these things even if you don't think you do. So that's actually a good point too. So those are things I'm going forward to, and I think If you're not in the Telegram group, t.me/Atlantic Homeland, I think that's another good point. Make sure you like, subscribe, set up all the notifications. You'll notice I'm trying to do more content. Things are working out a little bit better. I hope everything's good in Australia for you. I assume you're in Australia, not New Zealand. I think I know that. Um, and I hope you're not in Melbourne, because Lord knows everything I read about that sounds like it's awful. From what I read, I mean, I don't know how true it is, but what I read was that they were basically importing kind of hired thugs to service the cops down there in that area. So hopefully it does. Oh, you're on the island. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I actually don't know much about Tasmania, other than that, they made a cartoon little character of it, but I'm sure it's very beautiful. Was it Hobart, right? It's the capital of that. For some reason, I'm good with maps, but something to learn about someday. Australia has some really wonderful people, and it's a shame that the government. And I think you're going to get hit first with things that are going to affect the U.S. I think, Morrison, if I remember right, seems like he's kind of going along with it, but. Let's see. Timmy says it's a race to build a low-tech comm structure before we get nuked off the internet. Indeed, it is, and it needs to be redundant, and it needs to be localized. And frankly, yours truly needs to do more with it. I'm just trying to figure out what we should do, because the problem is, like, I sit there and I feel like the computer in war games, like with Joshua at the end of it. And I like imagine, well, you could do different things, but a lot of things you do that would be designed to make things better would ultimately just make it worse. And you got to remember what the AI strategy, and I call it AI, by the way, mind you, these collectivists who support the idea of like trying to have a single system, they're the hive mind, and they are just. It's what is it? It's like that Grimes does. It's that Roko's basilisk. It's the idea that you're going to go ahead and serve the dark AI before it exists, because you know it's going to punish you once it comes into being. It's a very sort of right, or excuse me, kind of totalitarian left Maoist logic. Eric Fromm here, Escape from Freedom. So what they will do over and over again is that they'll create situations where they use hives to punish and decapitate the other side, because if they represent a collective and they're standing against hierarchy, hierarchy is actually more effective. But the reason they are able to be effective about it is they decapitate the leadership by using branding. For instance, what they did with the alt-right is just one example of it. And mind you, there was a lot of subversion in it, but the point of it was they were saying things that were true and that would have been helpful and considered rational in any other era. But the problem ended up being that they decapitated leadership on moral failings. Yet you never see the moral failings of someone who, like, say, Richard Blumenthal, perfect example, senator from Connecticut. Dude lied about being in Vietnam, still got elected because he had a D behind his name, and suddenly the scandal went away because, hey, they recognize it's convenient. And besides, they like people who are on board with the system, who are corrupted. Why? Because you can control them. It's blackmail. It's like the mafia used to do. You couldn't be a made man until you killed someone. Why? Because you would be able to go to bed and be controlled. It's the same thing we see with Epstein. It's no accident. Why did Epstein not get punished? Well, who was he representing? Most likely of all things, probably Mossad. But these are things you're never allowed to question, and you can't go back and say those things. So if you're going to set something up, the problem is it almost has to be leaderless, and that's a problem, because individualists do not organize collectively unless the anger gets bad enough. And that's why there's a very small window where certain things may or may not precipitate. And do I know what's going to happen? I have no clue. But I do know that there are certain chips in play, and it could get interesting, and I'm hoping to get more people aware. And I don't know, I mean, what we could do. I do think that, I do feel strongly about one thing, and I'm going to push for this, and this might get my channel axed, but it's fine. I'm going to do it anyway, which is that enjoy your Thanksgiving. Enjoy it with your family. Enjoy it with whomever you want, however you want. Except there might be consequences, and that's okay. It's fine. There are consequences. People will get sick, but we're adults, so we can make those choices. Don't let Governor Cuomo, Governor Whitmer, Governor Evans, Governor Inslee, Governor Newsom, any of these people tell you, not just them, Governor DeWine, there's Republicans too, any of them, Governor Sununu, don't let them stop you. Go enjoy your family. Have a great holiday. Have a turkey. Laugh. Have fun. Make peace with one another, Praise the Lord. Show some thanks to him, too. You're going to need him in the future. We're going to need him now, but those are the challenges. Good morning, Chris. How you doing? Hope you're doing well today. So let me grab a glass of water. I'll be right back. We'll go a little forward. If you guys have some questions you want to throw up, I'll talk for a couple more minutes, and we'll continue going forward. So just I'll be back in about 30 seconds, because the water's on the other side of the room. So you're listening to Free Atlantic Radio, the voice of the Northeastern Nation. I am your bum with the beard, Tom Kaczynski, coming back in here, rocking the morning sweatpants. Hope you all are having a great morning this morning. And I had forgotten before the show, just shows you how absent-minded I am, that I had actually made some tea for myself. So not only do I get a glass of water, but I get some nice tea. So very fond of the Tetley British blend, although my wife makes amazing loose leaf tea, but I leave that to her. She has a little bit of English genetics, so she has that perfect tea making gene. All right, and good morning to everybody who's here. Good morning, Fossil, and I'll go back through and see what y'all wrote while I was gone, because I probably missed a couple things. Good morning, Corey. Matt, we are in the Frenches. Angelique, good to see you. Hope you're doing well this morning. Let's see. You're outside in the snow in 15 degrees, trying to unfreeze the chicken waterer. Well, pro tip, assuming the plastic won't break too fast, what I like to do is I put water in my electric tea kettle, and then I'll dump it slowly over anything that's frozen that I need to do. But that is not that I have a chicken waterer, but I have had times when things on the backyard had frozen up, and I needed to take care of that. So that definitely has been something we've been able to do. But yeah, I hope you're all having a very good morning. And I don't know. Finally rained out here in California. Yeah, so what's going on in California? I'm not following as closely as I should be. The thing that's been weird to me through all the instability is that California has been surprisingly stable. Things have been nuttier, I should say, in the Northwest throughout this whole thing. I'm kind of surprised by that, but although my one friend tells me it's that Latinos don't really go for some of the stupidity, and San Francisco's got too many other problems. So who knows? But I don't know California that well. I used to go to California when I was a kid. Back in the 80s, I remember it was a glamour destination. Now it's like a containment zone, but which is sad because there's probably a lot of really nice people in California. It's a beautiful area, from what I remember. I never understood why they didn't build desalination plants. That seemed like it'd be a good idea. I know you guys have water issues all the time. I remember that was a huge issue in the 80s, and yet it's a problem that you never see solved. But yeah, it seems like it's stable there. It's pretty stable up here. I mean, I don't know. I will have a report from the road because I don't like to say where I'm going until after I go somewhere, but I'm going to be going through places that are less stable. Let's just put it that way. If everything goes according to plan, and I will let you know what's going on with that. If it's sort of a quick thing, which is a shame because there's actually members throughout the region I'd love to visit. And I'm always amused by people who are here who are from totally different regions than I am, because I hope you're making progress in your own areas. And who knows, maybe we'll eventually work our way to you. Maybe it'll all come back together. It's not impossible, but it would be hard. It would have to have a lot more decentralization, and I think about these things because I had a lot of conversations with people in the Northwest, because people in the Northwest really just feel kind of stuck, because there's just a few cities and a lot of corruption behind it. I mean, if you really absent Portland and Seattle from the equation, you really have a pretty sane, nice region, and it's just bad politics, and that's what it is. I mean, that's why we probably, to be honest with you, I think do need. Um, uh, uh, I don't want to say authoritarian, but we need a hierarchical solution for a while. And it's a hierarchical solution that's smart and does like Cincinnatus does and returns power locally. You don't need an absolute tyrant. We don't need a Frederick the Great here to build the empire. We need someone who's more like an Aurelius type figure. And that's a challenge, because America's problem isn't that we're not bellicose enough. I mean, we've been warlike forever. It's that we need to figure out how to be more invested in ourselves. But I say all these things because I look at it in the realm of philosophy and ideology in the world we came from before, and that world's dead. That world went away with COVID, and now we are dealing with the battle against transhumanism. And to be honest with you, we're going to be fighting for our lives against that. I have a prediction, actually, and you're going to find this ugly, but I'm going to make it, that 5 years from now, people will show up that look like people you once knew who were not themselves anymore, where because of the integration of technology and humanity, people who you once loved will be a threat and a danger to you, because they won't know. I mean, reprogramming the human brain, hacking humanity is what we're going to be fighting here. That's going to be a real problem. So, all right, let me answer some of your questions. I'll go back. How do I get my older relatives to prepare? We are in the deep south, but winter is coming. Well, if you're in the deep south, make sure you have a lot of seeds. Make sure that you have good access to water supplies. Make sure you know your neighborhood safe. I know the Deep South is very much street by street and town by town. There's cities that are very safe and cities that are very unsafe and near each other. Reminds me of when I went to a wedding in Memphis, actually. One street, you see these huge antebellum mansions. The other street, it's the hood. It's just one of those crazy things. But I think what you have to do if you want to get people prepared is you lead through your own example. And people are not always going to listen. But what I find is useful, and what I do with my show, actually, it's a little bit propagandistic, but it's true. I could just get on here sometimes, and sometimes I'm honestly tempted. I go back and forth about it to just get on here and speak theology for hours because that interests me. And I think it's probably more important than any of this, but you listen to me because I talk about things that are relevant to you, so I get to talk about things that are relevant to me. And that's what a good friendship is like. I mean, I don't ever, if people bring issues to me that are important, I don't ever just dismiss them out of hand, unless it's just something that's just totally bizarre or grotesque. I mean, then I will. But otherwise, if there's something legitimate, and it's a pretty broad scope of what I consider legitimate, we have the conversation and I learn things. And that's what it is. This is designed to be very comfy, and it's humanizing too, because one of the things that they do is they tell you, someone like me is a horrible person. I mean, I read the things that are written about myself. I'm like, that must be an interesting guy to meet. I wonder who he is. I've never been him, never met him, but that's what happens. I mean, it's amazing how few people it takes, and no one pushes back against it. And then people look, and then you say, "Oh, well, he's this, this, and this," and people say, "Oh, you're not like that at all." I'm like, "No, I'm not like that at all." But they don't let you present your own case, and that's the problem. You now are assumed guilty until you can prove yourself innocent, but you're not allowed to bring your own evidence. We're all Michael Flynn. It's one of those things. Or Edward Snowden, or whoever you want to pick, or Julian Assange. It's not a political thing per se. It's just that this is the price of being honest and truthful, is you're a dissident at this point, and you have a system that hates you and wants to kill you. But, as the Lord said, they hated me first, and he spoke truth much more profoundly than I could ever hope. Let's see. Kind of waiting for the U.S. to annex Australia in the Pacific. I think that's a possibility? Anglosphere when, right? I think I would find it improbable that the United States would ever try to directly annex Australia. I could imagine, if I didn't think we were dealing with the AI issues, if China and US become more aggressive against one another, if the Quad continues to develop, I could imagine a situation, theoretically, where if there is mass mobilization warfare, where you saw the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand maybe form something. But it's hard to imagine blocks like that forming empires today for one reason. The elites tend to work more with each other across or between countries rather than within countries to work for their own benefit. So what am I saying? I'm saying that a rich person in New York probably thinks they have more in common with a rich person in Shanghai than they do a poor person either in Appalachia or living in the shadow of the Three Gorges Dam. So what happens is a lot of wars are theatrical in the sense that certain people are not put at risk, or that there's certain understandings at this point, and that's the problem. I mean, one of the stories that we really need to tell, and this is actually, I'm glad you went here because it brought an interesting thought, is the betrayal of the elites of the people they serve under. Once upon a time, a king sought to be in charge of the people beneath him. Beneath, I don't mean morally beneath, I just mean simply in terms of location, that you had some nominal loyalty to who was there. Your tribal warlords. And that kind of went away throughout what would you call the early modern era. Take like Charles V as the perfect example, the guy's in charge of Spain and Austria, and as a Habsburg emperor, and the Netherlands, and places started revolting because they're like, this isn't our guy. And eventually, the Habsburgs got kind of pushed back to Austria, and then Spain went its own way, which was very wealthy, by the way. But that's, they sat people on thrones, and that was the way of thought leadership was. It was almost a bit like when I was a town manager in this one sense. You'd bring people from away in to kind of serve as leaders. And it's interesting, actually, if you study the history, how many of the great dictators, if you want to think of it that way, weren't from their home country, right? Stalin was a Georgian, not a Russian. Napoleon was a Corsican, which really made him Italian, not proper French. Hitler was an Austrian. He wasn't really German. I mean, yeah, Austria is part of Germany, but not really, if you know the history of it. And Hitler's bringing up, if such as it was in Vienna, not in Berlin. And it was, in fact, in response to Vienna that he became the way he did in many ways, because Vienna was a city where a failing empire gave power over to a strong bureaucracy, where certain certain people were gaming it certain ways, and not just of ethnic persuasions, but that's the nature of a falling empire. You see the same thing happen much in 19th century, 20th century Britain. They did the same thing before. Then they started shedding their empire. They lost India and whatnot. And you kind of wonder what would have happened if World War One didn't go forward, if imperialism could have been continued, and maybe it could have, and maybe it couldn't have. It's kind of hard to say. But you at the point you have mass literacy and awareness, people are you can't really rule by proxy the same way. You need people to accept an identity, and that's why I think decentralization is the natural way forward. To answer your question indirectly, and why I don't think we're going to see an Australian superstate. However, I could imagine. In my sort of happy world, that we could have worlds where there was an alliance of states that were nominally independent but allowed free trade and exchange between each other, including potentially people exchanges. I certainly could say here in the Atlantic, we would love to have a Tasmanian devil running amongst us as long as he was, properly devout. But I had the opportunity to have a very good friend several years ago who was from Melbourne, who taught me quite a bit about Australia, and I find them a wonderful and warm people. I worry about China looking at you as a resource colony and maybe trying to take you over in the fullness of time. I hope that doesn't happen. But are those things we could do? Absolutely. France actually, it's interesting, and this is one of the reasons why I talk to Quebecois so much, is France actually kind of did something like that. Like, if you look at the way French colonialism works, like, say, Tahiti or French Polynesia or Saint Pierre Miquelon, or Martinique isn't part of them, but there are various possessions they have that are outside of France proper. They are treating as départements of France, so they're not treated as separate colonies in the same way, whereas the English colonies kind of broke away and had their own thing. So you could put it back together. I think that's possible. But I think in the United States, if we put something together, if America goes full on empire, which under Trump it might, and if it's learned that the communists were heavily involved in Canada, which I think they may have been, I would not be surprised to see the United States and Canada eventually merge together in some sort of sense. That is something that I thought would be possible for quite a while. And I do think when you start to look at Canada and you look, I know the Canadians think they're more stable because they're socially more stable, but economically they're hanging on by a thread in terms of their debt to income ratio. So when a reset comes, they can make life real miserable. And the Canadians, God bless them, are going to go along with whatever's done to them. Yeah, I just think that's the case of how it's going to work. So we'll see. I don't know what happens, but I mean, if things get really funny and it starts falling apart, I don't know. I could see Canada breaking along certain lines. I mean, the Quebecois are going to do their own thing, and Ontario's going to try to hold it together, and Alberta hates Ontario, so there's a dynamic there. And if America starts breaking apart, or if, one of the rumors I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'll share it as it was told to me, was Steve Quayle was saying those camps that got my channel axed from Podbean, that they're putting up in Canada for quarantines are really for American dissidents. And I will tell you this, and I want this on record right now. If you build camps for American dissidents in Canada, Americans are going to invade Canada. We did it before, we'll do it again. And I'm not saying that because of any threat to the Canadian people. I love the Canadian people, have no desire to that. I want to see the liberation of the Canadian people from a government that would do that to dissidents of a foreign country. And I would expect red-blooded Canadians, with their leaves to do the same thing if that was being done in upstate New York or northern Maine, and we would help them here because we need to have bonds of fellowship that are deeper than the statism and the laws put on us. I mean, laws have their legitimacy from the consent of the governed. We don't even consent to this. We're lied to. We're cheated. And these are the things that I think, revolutions are made out of. This is what Jefferson was talking about. These are the conditions. I mean, what we deal with is 1,000 times worse than what the American Revolution was caused by. Although the American Revolution, they say, oh, the Sugar Acts, the Tax Act, or the Intolerable Acts, the Townshend Acts. That's not what it was about. It was about colonial script. The colonies were rich because they could print their own money. The Bank of England wanted to change that, and they were forcing them to buy the tea with British currency, and it was impoverishing the colonies because they couldn't afford to have their own industry because they had to buy everything using British dollars, or the British pound sterling, I should say. If you control your own money, you're rich. And that's why the crypto market got tanked a few years ago, and that's why they're trying to get to a digital currency, which is what this is really about. Once the digital currency runs everything, and that's the only means of barter or exchange that people accept, they will own each and every one of us. And that's the midterm goal they want to get to, and I think they want to be there by the end of 2021, and perhaps quite more quickly than that. And having the economic collapse happen on the flip side of this, at the same time people are already desperate. Yes, there's going to be violence, but they want to purge the violent elements, and they just want the productive people who are going to, take their UBI maybe or work those things. How long until only digital currency can be used? It's a great question. I don't know the answer, but I will say something interesting from the United States. that some people can attest to. We've been told there's a national coin shortage here in the United States. So the banks have been sucking back up the physical species, the money, and then sucking up the dollars won't be that hard either. So there's a lot less coins on there. Everything's being put digital. And one of the side effects of COVID is now you're paying for everything with a card. Once you go ahead and you have, let's call it a Fed card, where you need that to get UBI, everyone will have one. So you'll get rid of all those excuses of saying, well, you can't have money, because then everyone will have that. And then they'll say, well, it's just efficient. So the question is, how fast can all that be rolled out? There was a post, I don't know where it came from, but it circulated the internet pretty broadly, where some Canadians were talking supposedly about this, and that they had said that this was scheduled to be done sometime in Q2 of 2021 as part of a larger breakdown. But then, we're going to have a second wave of COVID. It's going to be really bad. It will be as bad as it needs to be. Wink, wink. And then when that is complete, what they would end up doing is they would go forward and they would say, okay, if you take the vax and you take the UPI, we'll make you whole. We'll erase all your debts. You don't own anything, but you'll be where you are, and that's fine. And that's what it is. I mean, it's crazy. And this is why you got to go read Klaus Schwab. They're talking about the abolition of private property, and what happens, that means the state owns everything. And to an idealistic young person, that might sound really good, because yeah, there is a covetousness that the rich use against the poor. That's absolutely true, and it's something we should oppose. But it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this one. What ends up happening is, if you have no private property, there's nothing to present your dispossession. And the United States is, for better or worse, obsessed with and has more ownership of private property than anywhere else probably in the world. After that, it'd probably be the Canadians and maybe the Australians and, the Commonwealth sort of countries where this was out of English common law came forward. It's not a European tradition. Remember, these processes that are being created are coming out of the Central European tradition. There's no accident of Germans in front of this. It's always the Germans, man. They always get these utopian schemes where they put passion and precision together and they just try to destroy humanity. It's like every time they have to learn not to listen to Faust or not to listen to Mephistopheles, but it's just like, and I get what happens. I make fun about my German wife, but it's really true that genetics of people determine different things, and it's a funny thing how that works. And people say, "Oh, why don't you blame this other group?" Oh, yeah, they're terrible too, but they're just trying to steal everything from you. They're just trying. I mean, you have ultimately the ultimate planner, and you have the ultimate, sort of, hate to use the word, but parasitic, way of approaching things societally. And these things, like, we have to get outside this, and that's what the Atlantic Project's about. And for our friends in the South and in the West, by the way, you guys need to do that too. I mean, develop your own cultures. You have your own cultures. You just need to put them together, and take it from a Yankee up here. We'll have to do things differently, and hopefully it'll work out, and we'll figure it out. I mean, I'm not optimistic, but I want to think of something. I mean, I owe it to people, if I'm going to talk about problems, to at least try to imagine solutions, don't you think? So that's what I talk about, and there are people who listen to me. It's interesting, like when I go to my chats, we have some hardcore lefties in there and some hardcore righties, and I always say, okay, well, where's the middle? Where's the sanity? I'm like, and the one thing is, we are really good at calling each other out on our BS. We're like, yeah, no, that doesn't work. And what I've found is, when we can get past the politics and partisanship, and I mean that we get past the waving the red versus blue because it's closer to us, we don't really, most far left people I know don't believe in the Democratic Party any more than sort of right-leaning, real traditionalists believe in the Republican Party. And if we're willing to say, I'm like, okay, look, can you admit that bringing everyone in from everywhere isn't working, and that having no morality is great, and it's like or isn't great, and that you're gonna pretend that things are fake? And they're like, okay, we'll admit that. And then on the road, I'll be like, look, being rich and having no rules at all isn't working either. Do you want to live in anarchy? That's how you ended up with. That's how Somalia ended up like Somalia, right? And so there's a conversation there, and there are agreements. There's a sort of broad, how should I put it? There's a broad pathway we can agree with. There are certain things we can agree not to agree upon that we can permit without necessarily endorsing. I think that's important. We always have to endorse these days the things we don't like, and that's not good. But there are things we can say we absolutely want. There are things we can say we absolutely don't want. And if we can just agree on like 3 of each of those, we're going to be on our way doing well. So that is good. Good to see you, Chris, by the way. Thank you. I hope all is well out there in the land of Lincoln. Thank you. And hopefully, yeah, I'm glad, glad we have some medical professionals in here. Hopefully, as we go forward, you guys can keep me up to date. I don't discount any possibility. A lot of people who are on the right. I'm not really that way. I'm in my own universe at this point, but we'll look at what's happening with the ongoing pandemic and say, oh, it's all going to be a hoax. And even if it was a hoax, that doesn't mean the future is going to be a hoax. And I haven't ever believed it's a hoax. I know people have been sick. I know people who have had long-term autoimmune effects, including people who are close to the show. So I don't think it's that. I just don't think the response is proportionate to what's happening, because the thing is, the world is tough. Terrible things can happen, and yet you still need to go forward. But I'm not saying the past is not always indicative of future results. And so, keeping me honest on that, I follow evidence. And evidence to me is two parts. One of it is the knowledge and the theory of things, and two is the actual results of it. I followed the theory before the results were there. The results were fabricated, and I got fooled. And I say that because people always ask, why do you change your opinion? Because I'm following the evidence. It is, how should I say, consistency of action is overrated in a reality that constantly changes. You need to be able to be flexible enough to do that. And that's why, people always say, I don't get you. How can you were far left one moment and far right? Because I'm adapting to my circumstances. You know what? If I'm in water, I swim. If I'm on land, I walk. That's what we each have to be able to do. All right, let's see what else we got here. The writing is on the wall. Do I feel like Agenda 21 is the blueprint they follow? Everything they laid here is on the way. I think that there's a high overlap. I mean, I don't think they sit there and just go across it like it's a checklist. I think it's more like this, that, nature abhors a vacuum. When there's an opening and an opportunity, that this is the way that people go forward. And I think what they realized during the pandemic is that medical totalitarianism allowed certain options that other things would not. And people, because they were afraid of their safety, because A, they wanted to protect themselves, which is a natural instinct, but B, they wanted to go ahead and protect others and be responsible. It actually managed to be a strange way by which, for at least for a little while, they could get beyond the left-right paradigm to put something new in there. And that what happened while these lockdowns were happening is the story that really hasn't been told. We hear a lot of stories about, the fighting and the distractions we've been allowed, the riots, the political animus that was created. And Black Lives Matter was basically creating an old problem anew. But what we didn't hear anything about was what we should have been hearing, which was that the Federal Reserve Bank was basically collateralizing the whole economy. You still don't hear anything about it, and the silence about the theft of our economies is deafening. And unfortunately, you have to fight the battles in front of you. If you're getting surrounded by, you're watching someone rob the bank, or Koopa's running off with the princess, and you're surrounded by 1,000 Hammer brothers, well, then you're stuck. Unless a star comes down from heaven to save you, you're not going to be able to rescue the princess quite that quickly, and that's the problem. But the problem we go around with is we realize that people consume too many magic mushrooms, and we're all just shooting hammers at one another while the actual villains are getting away. And that's one of the things that I have to focus on, that I try really hard with this broadcast, is to remember who the real threats are, who the enemies are. The evil is real in the world, that there's a spiritual wickedness behind all of this, and it's very clever and it's very dastardly. It's smarter than you and I are, which is why being grounded in the word really helps. It helps me, and it would help you. I mean, it is the truth. And if you want to understand lesser truths, like how to see the world, it helps to understand greater truths. And that's why you say, you should get right with Christ. I mean, even if you're not prepared for faith, read the Gospels and see if you can take objection with anything he says. And then when a man's that smart, he might be onto something. Just a thought. So, get your last minute questions up. I'll say a quick prayer for us this morning, because we're coming up on the hour here on Free Atlantic Radio. This isn't my podcast, but I'm starting to do, was it sort of like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, although I don't promise to do it on any given day, because honestly, it's better for you. I show up when I feel like it, because when I have a good idea, I can do something that is helpful to you. Whereas if I just show up and try to throw it in, I can't. And when I have little bits of pieces of data, I put it out there, not because I have all the answers, but we talk, we learn, I read all your comments. And hopefully we become stronger together, and share the program with other people, by the way. That's how it grows, and that lets me do it more. And if I can do it more, you get some other stuff. So glad you made SPQR. You caught just the end of it. It's not too late for the fall of Rome. Let's see. NPR reporting this morning that Syracuse University students are fleeing town to avoid quarantine over Thanksgiving. Well, that's not surprising. I mean, it's at the beginning of this, that's what the Wuhan thing was all about, right? That they were fleeing town because they didn't want to get locked down. And I don't know. Elon Musk is kind of a weird dude, but he had an interesting quote where he had 4 COVID tests done. 2 of them found him positive, 2 didn't. I don't know that I trust this testing. It has very unreliable outcomes. Do I know people are still getting sick? Yeah. What's causing that? Could it be less light hours? Probably. Less vitamin D, certainly. Wearing the masks? Yeah. I think we just have to deal with it. I don't know. I mean, And I'll tell you what, these masks they have us wearing these rules like, okay, you're going to a restaurant, put on the cloth mask. But it won't protect you. Now you have to put it in while you walk through the door. Then you sit at the table, and then you can take it off so you can eat. I mean, what makes sense? I mean, it's just absurdity. But that's what they're doing. It's conditioning, and it could be. And look, there's a lot of people who go along with conditioning because they don't know better. I mean, I always tell Dana, the biggest mistake smart people make is thinking that other people are smart. They're not. It's just one of those things. And that's good advice, by the way, Timmy, about exposing yourself to the sun to get some vitamin D. Nature is a cure for lots of man's stupidity, including this disease to some extent. I mean, not magically, but you get the point. And definitely have faith. So those are some things I think, but yeah, I would ignore what they're saying for Thanksgiving. And if they want to make a big stink of it, maybe I'll get a bunch of my friends together and we'll all go ignore it together, you know. But I will say one thing: if you're going to protest against people at this point, you better make sure you have more numbers than the people who come to arrest you. And by the way, we've reached the point where I think we need to resist arrest. And I'm just going to say that. And I feel bad for the police, but you know what? The police need to recognize that they don't have the mandate to do what they don't have the mandate to do. You don't have the right to arrest people just because they're citizens. If we're going to deal with that, then let's get it on. That's how we're at. So let's hope it doesn't happen, but we see that happening worldwide. And I say this with much love and respect for people who are being put in very hard situations. But at the end of the day, sometimes the moral decision has to be forced. We're going to see how that goes. And in the meantime, if you want to be sane and you want to be an idiot like me who goes out there and tries to play hero every now and then, just stay home, keep it safe. Not because I'm telling you to not do things that you want to, but people are kind of nuts. Get friends around you can trust and do things smart. A prayer. Heavenly Father, I just pray as we come to this new morning, I want to say thank you for a new day, for the opportunity for each of us to use our reason and our intellect to work with everyone so that we can be more successful for our friends in Australia, for Britain, for Canada, throughout the English speaking world and beyond. I just want to say prayers for them in their countries. We don't know their conditions, but I certainly hope that, you know, they find their way to your truth and the liberty that you have promised each of us so that we can live in good conscience with one another. I pray for the many people who are confused and deluded to understand, you know, as Christ said, that loving your enemy is the pathway that we must take. And it's that way because a lot of times when we are motivated by what we think are good and they are motivated by what they think are good, that is how we are led into deception, much as the serpent did in promising, you know, that we would have knowledge of good and evil and yet led us unto death. So lead us not into death, but to the bread of life, which is Christ. So in Jesus' name, I will pray that for each and every person here, the blood of Christ over every one of you, because as I say so often, that we live in a world now where you don't get to separate everything out. Economics is caught up in your politics, is caught up in your social media. There's not like you're just pretending on the internet or you're just praying. All of these things are part of who you are, and you need to be ready for it. You need to be aware of these things. So please understand that as you go through each and every one of your days. I want to thank everyone for spending some time with me this morning. Go have a good morning. I'm going to try to do the best I can. I'm probably going to read something just for fun. I don't know if I'm going to read Childhood's End, which I started but didn't finish, or maybe I'll pick up Lord of the Rings, or we'll see if Dana's up. She should be up right about now, and then that means I got to go make some bacon. God bless every one of you. Have a good day.